that the role of the CIO has changed totally. You know, we were software developers and architects, and we could tell you what RAM to use based on its transactional speed. Do you think any of that matters anymore? The answer is no.
Welcome to This Week in Health IT, where we discuss the news, information, and emerging thought with leaders from across the healthcare industry. My name is Bill Russell, recovering healthcare CIO, writer, and advisor with the previously mentioned Health Lyrics. I was the CIO for a 23,000 person health system, and one of the biggest challenges was to remain current on the technology and the trends that were going on myself.
Think of artificial intelligence as a orchestra. Right now, machine learning, deep learning is getting a lot of attention, so I sort of equate that to the string section. And obviously there are many sections to the orchestra, so someday soon, hospitals, healthcare organizations are going to be able to have amazing music.
We are seeing instances of folks popping up, us included, where we're having a primary care physician set up with the dentist in the same office.
I would love to get to the space where eventually we're using voice recognition to do all of our navigation throughout the electronic health record.
When we worked at Microsoft, oftentimes, you'd have crazy deadlines. People would say, look, we're not saving anyone's life here. We can't say that anymore. And we love that. It's like we can save someone's life. We can prevent a complication or a readmission by catching it.
A lot of the feedback people are hearing about former Vice President's remarks is that he was remarkably pragmatic. And then the one that I'm most excited about, he notes that the Medicare Innovation Center, which was created by the Affordable Care Act, has the legal authority to experiment with new models to engage patients for purposes of getting better value care.
Hyper-consumerism driving everything to a digital experience, because if we don't make it easy for patients like ourselves to use healthcare on our smart devices, companies like Apple are starting to do it for us.
I think we're right on the cusp of a huge digital transformation. It'll be interesting to see how CIOs sort of address that. Welcome to This Week in Health IT, where we discuss the news, information, and emerging thought with leaders from across the healthcare industry. Today, we ask the question, what do executives need to know before they pull the trigger on mergers? Plus, we bust some of the cybersecurity myths that are out there. This is episode number 40. This podcast is brought to you by Health Lyrics. Health systems are moving to the cloud to gain agility, efficiency, and new capabilities. Work with a trusted partner that has been moving health systems to the cloud since 2010. Visit healthlyrics.com to schedule your free consultation. My name is Bill Russell, recovering CIO, writer, and advisor with the previously mentioned Health Lyrics. Before I get to our guests, I want to thank everyone, especially my guests who have made this show a success. We set a goal before we started the year to get 500 weekly downloads of the show in the first year, and so that was our big goal. And this past week, we eclipsed 1,000 downloads for the week. We want to thank you for making us a part of your week, and we hope that you will continue to share the podcast and the YouTube channel with your peers. Today's guest is new to the show. You're probably like the fourth Chime CIO of the year that we've had on here. A highly decorated industry veteran. Craig Richardville joins us from North Carolina. Good morning, Craig. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Bill. Thanks for having me.
I assume you're in North Carolina, but every time I check social media, you seem to be in like other countries or other locations. Are you in North Carolina today?
Today I am, even though I do have New York in my background. So I think when you're a child, the world is so large, but as you get an adult, you realize it's very flat, and you can really make yourself very mobile, in any places that need you.
Yeah, I think one of the posts I saw you in, were you in Asia, doing some things in Asia?
I was. I did some work in Thailand with a very large healthcare system, a healthcare system that was had part of the system was kind of more of a community service type system. It was a 2,300 bed single facility hospital with clinics, et cetera, on it. Then they also had a private facility, which was 350 beds, which catered to the enhanced, the improved, those that had more of a cash payment system.
Wow. So healthcare is pretty dramatically different. I mean, Thailand's if you've been to Bangkok, it's a pretty advanced city. Or is it pretty dramatically different or pretty similar to what we have here?
It's interesting, when going into it, I had some assumptions of what I was going to run into, and some of those assumptions were wrong. The way I would say it is that when you look at the U.S. healthcare system and how we advanced on the digital technology ways, it's much more advanced than what I observed. However, when you look at outcomes, when you look at margins, when you look at all of the measurable pieces that we all aspire to be, they actually were leading in many, if not most, all of those cases.
Wow. That's interesting. Well, I'm going to do for people who don't know you, I'll do a quick flyby of your accomplishments and who you are. If they want to know more, you have a website. So you have CraigRichardville.com.
Yes, I do. Please go and visit.
Yeah, which has a ton of stuff on there. You've done advocacy work in the nation's capital. We've already mentioned in 2015, John E. Gall Jr., CIO of the Year by Chime. Your 2017 Leadership Award for Charlotte CIO. Most recently, you were with Carolina's healthcare system, which is now Atrium Health, for those who don't know. Roughly, that's roughly what, about an $8 billion system? Is that roughly right?
Depending on how you measure it, it's somewhere around $6 billion in terms of the owned assets. Then we look at the managed assets, it's right around $11 billion.
Okay, and the geography today is Carolinas, but obviously the name change sort of denotes that it's moving outside of North and South Carolina, I would assume.
Yeah, I think that's the intent of the name change. When I was there, we had 3 hospitals. When I left, we had 42, all in North and South Carolina.
So clearly you had a lot of work to do while you were there. So 14 years in a row, most wired designation. Which is awesome. You're a fellow at American College of Healthcare Executives, fellow at Healthcare at HIMSS, chairman of Premier Member Technology Improvement Committee. You're on several boards: University of North Carolina Charlotte Foundation, board member of Care Connect, board member of Carolina's Shared Services. So not only were you able to be the CIO of a rapidly growing healthcare system, but you found time to give back and be a part of a lot of these things that were going on in the community, which is exceptional. So, one of the things we like to do with our guests is start with a pretty open-ended question. What's one thing, or what are some things that you're working on today that you're really excited about?
Well, there's probably 2 things I'll mention. First and foremost, I have 3 boys, and 2 of them are getting married within the next year. 1 in 2 months and 1 in 7 months. So from that standpoint, like any parent, that's really on top of mind for me. But secondly, professionally, what I've been doing for the last 6-7 months is really going out and looking at different companies of different sizes, different companies that actually deliver across multiple industries, and looking to see a handful of really golden nugget companies that I would really be interested to be part of, working with, and or that when I was in the CIO seat, I would have appreciated people bringing those kinds of nuggets to me.
Yeah. One of the things I've thought about is we could do a whole show on CIOs in transition. I mean, your story, my story, and a handful of others that I've had conversations with. I know that a friend of mine just became a co-CEO at a former CIO here in Southern California, just became a co-CEO of a pretty fascinating tech startup that's doing some really cool big data stuff in healthcare. And I think there's a lot of different directions CIOs have ended up going. They can go in that startup route. Praveen from Stanford went to a startup. This gentleman from Molina went to a startup. So you can go the startup route. You can go back into the CIO route. I started a consulting practice going back out. What other directions do you think CIOs end up going at this point? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do think it's a very interesting piece to be. I mean, the role that we've had, the science that's behind what we've done, what we've been able to accomplish, especially in healthcare, in which we've been able to do a lot of things in a very short period of time, where we look at some of the other industries, whether it's retail or banking, others, that they've done some things over a couple of decades to get to their point. We've done things, anywhere between 6 and 10, in some cases 12 years. And I think we really advanced the system. So when you look at a CIO and you look at the industries, most industries all becoming technology centric, the CIO role can actually go all the way across. So I like it when people are saying the CIO is becoming the CEO or the CIO within quote unquote healthcare. can be the CIO within retail or banking. I think there's so much that we can deliver back to other industries or other companies. The one thing I'll say the most, and I think for all of us that have been successful in this role, the biggest thing that I have been proud of, and I'm sure yourself and others, is really just the development of people and having the ability to learn and to deal with multiple people at different levels across the organization. You don't come in with the mindset of a technology person. You come in with the mindset of a business person to solve problems. And because of that, you're bringing in all the other senior executives and able to bring them around you so that you can be part of that decision-making process or part of that inner circle.
We've learned that when somebody goes, hey, are you going to do this big, are you going to do that EMR migration? You're going to bring all those things in. Our first question is, usually what problem are you trying to solve? Tell me what, then it's a matter of rallying people. It's really it's a leadership and a people role much more than a technology role at this point.
Yeah. And for me, sometimes that answer is, it's not, I'm going to do it. We're going to do it.
Yeah.
It's all a partnership. We're all in this together, no matter what the objective is.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So our show breaks down into two segments, in the news and then sound bites, where I ask you a series of questions. We'll start with in the news. I think the big story this week, and we try not to cover every one of these that's talked about, but this one's pretty big. It comes from the Houston Chronicle. It's the Memorial Hermann to merge with Baylor Scott & White, creating the largest health system in Texas. And we know that in Texas, they like to have the largest things. And this is now a pretty significant, they were significant health systems in and of themselves. Bringing them together makes them pretty big. So let me read a couple things from this. Two of the biggest hospital chains in Texas announced plans Monday for a merger that would create a mega system stretching from Dallas to Austin to Houston, treating patients in more than 30 counties and employing more than 73,000 people across the state. Memorial Hermann Health System, Houston's biggest nonprofit hospital chain, and Baylor Scott & White Health, the largest in Dallas, have signed a letter of intent to begin negotiations with the goal of having a definitive agreement in place by next spring. And then it has the usual stuff, growing national trend, like-minded systems, economies of scale to address growing consumer trend within healthcare. The article actually gets a little more interesting down at the bottom, and that is, the cost of healthcare is the number one issue in America, whether it's in D.C. or Austin, Texas. One of the people is quoted as saying, so taking costs out of the system will be an important part of the journey as we come together. Actually, this was the CEO, I believe, of Memorial Hermann. So they actually just come straight out and say, taking costs out will be an important part, which is actually kind of unusual for these kinds of announcements, especially this early in the process. Officials said that most of the cost savings would come from sharing of expertise, collaborations, and technology, as is usually the case. It's not clear whether the merger will lead to job cuts. That two systems combined have nearly 5,000 current job openings. So with 5,000 job openings, there might not be a need, is what they're essentially saying. Actually, I find it interesting. Usually when mergers come out, there's no talk of any reductions, at least for a good period of time. To have one of the CEOs come out and start talking about reductions this early is pretty interesting. Have you seen? First of all, have you ever done a merger? Have you ever done a merger that hasn't led to some aspect of restructuring or job attrition in the process?
Yeah, no, I mean, when you look at the cost of healthcare and you look at especially a healthcare provider, somewhere between 45 and 55% of all of our expenses are labor. So from that standpoint, it just makes reasonable, whether you're doing it as a cost-cutting objective or you're doing it because of a merger or an acquisition, there is going to be some impact to your labor bottom line. But, it depends on how you're handling it. So to me, the most important part is try not to affect people. So the fact that they have 5,000 probably budgeted job openings means they could cut several thousand jobs, restructure the work to process the workflow and not impact the person, and still be able to achieve their budgeted expectations of reductions. So given, that Baylor and Scott & White have recently done this, and Memorial certainly is a very well recognized and respected organization, I got to believe with both of them coming together with their past successes, they will have the opportunity to make a difference. And I think part of that will be to lower the cost. The expense structure. The thing that happens with that, though, is what are you going to do with those savings? Are those savings can be reinvested back into the company, do other things with it? They can go toward bonuses, to administrators and physicians and others, or they can go back to the patients, or a combination of all three. And I think that's where, the rubber kind of meets the road, is depending on what the outcomes are going to look like, what is going to be done with those outcomes to better the patient experience or the patient visit.
Yeah, and actually, as the story goes on, towards the bottom, they cover, so many healthcare economists disagree on the notion that hospital mergers lead to better, more efficient care for patients. Vivian Ho, a health economics professor from Rice's Baker Institute of Public Policy, said she worries the proposed merger could have the opposite effect. She pointed to research showing increase in healthcare costs. And then they have 4 or 5 other corroborating kind of statements around that it hasn't led to better outcomes or lower costs in the communities that they've served. Why do you think so many mergers haven't led to either better outcomes or lower costs in the community? Is it, is it because we're not taking those savings and passing them on to the community, or is it less competition in those markets? I mean, what do you think? What do you think it could be?
I think those are very valid point statements, and the concerns when you have something of this size coming in. I think to me, most of it has to do with the art of the deal. It has to do with what is the deal that is being done, and what are the realistic expectations. In many cases, they may overcommit and underdeliver, even though that delivery might be better than what the previous environment was. If you commit X but you don't achieve it, it looks like it's a failure. So for me, I think it's really kind of trying to find the right balance of commitment, of delivery, and making sure that that the community and the patients and the providers all experience some type of improvement. And when you look at change management, having been through several mergers, acquisitions, partnerships / management agreements over the last 2 decades, it's really all about establishing the correct expectations and then realizing those expectations. And in many cases, your goal is to overachieve, what you've already committed to. So as long as you go into it, I think with a realistic understanding of what you want to try to get out of it, ensure that it's measurable, ensure that you can track against it. And the other part is we're in a very ever-changing environment. So as we start to shift and move things from volume to value, it's not an experiment where today, when they make this announcement, and 3 years or 5 years later when they measure it, it's not like the environment's the same environment. So there could be all different kinds of aspects that may impact what those results would be and how some people may interpret those results. It could have been a lot worse, maybe it could have been a lot better. So to me, it's just kind of measuring, monitoring, ensuring that you're doing the right things that the boards want to come together for. And in these cases, they're all community-based. So from that standpoint, what they want to do is measure the benefits back to the community. And those are, you can measure that in multiple different ways. And then change management's a big piece too. I think that's probably one of the underlying assumptions that people don't take as seriously. What they should is the change management that happens. So if you want to have a more efficient system, more effective system, that means something's going to change. And in many cases, as you know, Bill, that means people are going to have to change. The people are really hard to change. You got 2 organizations, highly respected, highly decorated, coming together. They're both going to have best practices, but the reality is there's only going to be one best practice. So it's not going to be multiple. So as you start to bring in different service lines together, or different corporate areas together, they're all going to have to agree as to what the next best practice is going to be. It could be neither of the 2 that they've been practicing, but actually there's a third outcome now by taking the best of both worlds and putting it together. I think that's the utopia that we're all looking for.
Yeah, so here's the good news. The good news is that Matt Chambers he's got the merit badge on M&A because the Baylor Scott and White merger was something that he was present for. So he's done it before, which means he'll have an appreciation for the complexity of org change management and all the things that you're talking about. I know that Memorial Hermann was doing a search for a CIO earlier this year, so it's not really clear to me whether they ever filled that position. So I'm going to shift this towards healthcare IT now and just focusing on that. And we're going to give Matt some free consulting. Not that he's asked for it, but we'll give it to him anyway. What do you think Matt needs to do? Now, they haven't even, they haven't even gotten to a definitive agreement yet. What do you think Matt needs to do over the next 6 months or so to ensure the best outcome for the merger from, for both organizations?
Well, this is the most important piece of the relationship, is to thoroughly understand each organization and what a combined organization might look like and identify those benefits. And you see it all across the country where sometimes they do have a letter of intent to come together, but they don't make it. Because as they start to peel back the onion, they start seeing that there are things that maybe they had expected or unexpected things start to show up on either organization, and we try to bring it together. Either it's a cultural problem, it's a financial problem, it's a clinical expertise, whatever those things are, start to peel that back. And you see some that are successful, you see some that have gone on and, for a couple of years, several years before making a decision. I think this is the most important piece, is to truly be a very open, transparent, in this due diligence phase where each organization is really exposing themselves to each other. But that is the opportunity to make sure that you thoroughly understand what you're getting into, so that hopefully when the spring comes around, you have a definitive agreement and objectives of what you want to get accomplished, and the realistic expectations that you can either achieve or overachieve those expectations. And so these next 6 months or so, I think, are going to be critical that everybody is open, transparent. There's nothing that's being hidden or forgotten about, but that you really know what you're getting into, just like any marriage, between a husband and a wife or any other relationship. You've got to really understand the other party coming into it if you really want a good outcome at the end.
So is there a common mistake that CIOs make in M&A activity, do you think?
Yeah, I do. I can't say that it's always a mistake, but I think there's an assumption that running on a single system or a single set of systems is the best way to go. So whether you're talking about the EMR, whether you're talking about, corporate areas with ERP systems or et cetera, I think there's a natural tendency to say if we're all upon the same one, it's going to be a better, more effective, more efficient. I think what happens is both systems in this case or in any other case have made huge investments in IT over the years. And so just to throw away that investment and merge it together, that's a big cultural issue. That's a big financial issue. I think you've got to thoroughly understand which of the priorities that need to come together first. So you start bringing the organizations together. You will see things like your communication systems, email, phone systems, et cetera, some of your video conferencing, all that coming together right off the bat. Nobody typically has a strong play or preference to what they want to use, but you want to be able to operate like one system. When you look at things like ERP systems, to me, that's probably something too that you want to start bringing together to get the efficiencies and try to get some of the squeeze out of the workplay. Then we get to the clinical systems, those are very sensitive systems. You have people who have a lot of pride and a lot of ownership of what they've done, and to put them all upon the same system may or may not be the right thing to do at that time. I do think as time evolves, it does become the right time. Once you start to depreciate that investment, it's down to the point to reinvest on bringing it together. But they have to be that right up front. I think you're probably throwing away some good dollars, or you have to be realized in terms of the returns. And it's not a priority at this time, because to bring those clinical service leaders together, those are people that are extremely bright. They are optimistic. They have a lot of characteristics that are going to be, that they have the best practice, and those are going to take some time to kind of work through and to show each other that type of respect. So I think those are things that probably lag a little bit farther down the road. But to me, it's just kind of reiterate, it's really that you have to be on one system and that's going to really achieve your economies. It doesn't. And it may actually even cause more problems with change management, education, training, things of that nature. And in many cases, because we're so immature in our market with our systems, it's like the baby to some of the leaders. This is what they produced. They made this happen, whether it was an Epic or a Cerner or a Meditech or you name it. This is something that they really feel emotionally attached to. You've got to remove those emotions. That just comes with time.
Yeah, a lot of emotion. And it's interesting that does end up being one of the first questions that gets asked by everybody. It gets asked by the media. It gets asked by, all your clinicians, like, are we going to their system? Are we, and the answer to that question is, we're still working on a definitive agreement. Once the definitive agreement's in place and we're working towards merger, we're still not going to be able to make that decision. We're not going to be able to make that decision until our clinicians are sitting in the room with their clinicians, talking about all aspects of clinical care and what our desired outcomes are. and then determining, what's the best system and what drives the best thing. So it's usually not for another 12 months after the merger, unless it's if it's a merger of this size, two equals sort of coming together, that's a different animal than, say, a large health system acquiring a small whatever practice. That's probably a different conversation. But even then, it's not the kind of thing while you're doing negotiation that's that easy to answer whether it's going to be the best. So
yeah, and if you look at today's world and the future of the delivery of healthcare, interoperability becomes such a key concept that that the other providers in your market are not going to have the same quote unquote information systems that you have in many cases. And from that standpoint, you've got to start improving your ability, your art, your science around communicating back and forth with other providers, because you're going to have that in your ACO or other types of associations that you're creating. You're going to have to have that core competence of being able to integrate back and forth between multiple different vendor/systems.
Yeah, you might as well figure it out now. I'm gonna move us to the next story, and we're actually not even going to cover the next story. We're just going to sort of use it as a backdrop for a conversation. So, Healthcare IT News has a whole section on cybersecurity today, and one of the stories they have is 10 stubborn cybersecurity myths busted, and they have some things listed there that are pretty interesting. But it got me to thinking it would be interesting to talk to another CIO about what they think are some cybersecurity myths that are out there and why they are myths. So here's the challenge. What I'd like to do is go back and forth on some of the myths that we've seen in cybersecurity myths we've seen in healthcare that are out there, and just sort of bat them back and forth. And just to give you an idea, I'll start us off. I was in a meeting with our internal auditor, and we were sort of presenting our security posture, and they were sort of commenting on it. And a former NSA person was sitting there, and she looked at me and she said, she goes, "Okay, I'm gonna give you one thing that you need to do, and it's going to change how you do all of your security." She said, "Assume they are already in your network." And as we started talking about it, I think the myth is that you can keep them out. And she said, "Assume they're already in your network, and they might even be in with proper credentials." And she goes, "So now how do you design your security?" And I thought, wow, that really does change things. Instead of that exterior being the end all be all, now you have to look at a more comprehensive security posture where you're looking at people's activities on the wire and saying, does that activity match what they've been doing for the last 6 months? And if it doesn't, that becomes a red flag. So you're looking at behavior on the wire, you're looking at exfiltration of data, you're looking at a lot of different things than just, do we have the wall built up, and do we have policies in place that there's, sometimes with the walls built up as well as you can and your policies in place as well as you can, they're still on the wire, and you have to start looking for that activity. So I think that's for me, that was one of the biggest myths that was busted for me, which is, assume they're on the wire and assume that you can't keep them out. So what's a myth that you've run across?
Well, it's interesting. Like, for example, in this article, it's in Healthcare IT News. And, for me, when you look at, the cybersecurity and the whole aspects around this is not a healthcare issue. This is a total all industry issue. Everybody's in it together. So the fact that we advocate on behalf of the healthcare and financial services and retail, and this is one of the things, like, for example, the Charlotte CIO that you mentioned at the beginning, one of the things that I was the chairman of for the inaugural year, and at our annual banquet, we actually had over 700 people participate. So a lot of people are interested about bringing things together across all the industries, and I'm very proud to have been part of that. When you look at cyber, and next week, that's actually is our next event. Is we have one event every quarter is about cyber. And so you're going to have the major banks in town, you're going to have the major retailers in town, the major energy in town, the major healthcare systems in town, et cetera, all participating on the cyber piece. So it's really not a healthcare IT type thing. It is a IT/business. So when you look at not even the CIO.com, but these are the business aspects, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, the types of information that needs to be exposed to is to the board members and the senior executives. This is a business issue of having the cybersecurity. The one thing we don't have the luxury of that we had, from a physical security attack, I don't have to put anti-missile systems around my facilities or anything. So the government protects us in certain aspects. But when we look at the internet and the way that it's set up to be a global network, the United States can't put a border around it and provide those protections. So we're kind of all in it right now on our own. So to me, I think it would be a very nice way to move forward is to actually have multiple across industry CIO leadership getting together to start to look at how do we fight and protect, our assets, our data from cyber attacks as a unified industry as opposed to the different sectors that we have.
Yeah, I can see that as one of the myths that we probably believe is that we need to do this ourselves. And as you're pointing out, we all have the problem. I remember hearing a gentleman speaking, and he said, and actually he was sort of dissing the government a little bit. He goes, for cybersecurity, essentially these countries that are stealing the data, and in this case, he used China as an example. He goes, this is the equivalent of China parking aircraft carriers off the East Coast and West Coast and just, attacking on a daily basis. He said, the federal government needs to step in here. He goes, because almost none of you can protect against a nation attack on your individual organization, because those nation state attacks on your hospital or on your organization are, unlimited funding, unlimited time, unlimited resources. So, so how do you think we're going to partner with how have you partnered with, say, the FBI, with the federal government? How have you seen them sort of take a role in this?
Well, I've advocated up on Capitol Hill multiple times for multiple different topics, and cyber was one of them. And so I represented Chime, which is a fantastic organization that I've represented Premier. And part of those discussions and talking to the federal government is they really will say, if you want us to help put some borders around, we'll probably set you back about 10 years, given the different restrictions and the different things that they have in place there and the expertise that they don't have. So I really think it's across all industry thing. That's why, like, for example, next week at the Charlotte CIO, it's going to be all the CIOs across, multiple industries representing, probably about 40 to 50 different major companies that are home-based here in Charlotte. We'll all be coming together to talk about cyber and the things that they're doing, what we're doing. And when you say you can't do it yourself, you're 100% correct. I think that's a misnomer that some of us, may have had in the past. I started doing cloud computing, maybe about 10, 12 years ago, moving things off premise, moving things out, knowing that I did not want to be a data center centric company nor a service, but that was going to be more of a utility. And it's going to be what I do with that information to actually make the difference. And one of the questions that came up was, how are you going to have our patient data, our most precious data, off campus somewhere else being stored? And my response to the board at that time was, you can't expect me with the budget and the investments that you're making today to have a better perimeter for protection and detection when it does come in than somebody who does this as part of their core business. So actually, by moving it off-site or moving it up to the cloud, in many cases, you have a higher level of security and protection by doing it that way. And then it becomes more of a service. You still got to have some people, on the street, some feet on the street in your shop. But a lot of those services, the 7/24 monitoring, all those types of pieces need to really be helped by somebody who does it as a core component of their business. And we do it as as kind of almost like a insurance policy for our business. It just doesn't have the amount of investment that others can do, and make in the cybersecurity space.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the myths, right? So cloud is not secure. Well, saying cloud is not secure is like saying healthcare IT is not secure. Well, it depends on which one you're talking about. But Microsoft's cloud, Google's cloud, Amazon's cloud, Box's cloud, Salesforce's cloud. If they get breached, that's their core business, and they will have a significant hit on their revenue, their shareholders, their share price. And all. So you have to know that they're spending a ton of time and a ton of money on security, and probably far more than any individual healthcare system is spending on security. So I agree with you. I think that's one of the myths, is that cloud is not secure. There are many clouds that are much more secure than what we have. Here's another myth I'm going to throw at you, which is cybersecurity is a technology problem. I don't, cybersecurity has a component that's technology, but at the end of the day, it's 70% of all breaches are caused by individuals either clicking on something, doing something, reusing their password all over the internet, having it hacked that way. I know that, and I've shared this before, that there's a CIO I know went to RSA, I believe, and said, we want to do an audit. We want to see if you can get some of our physician credentials on the black market. And it only took them about 48 hours to come back with some actual credentials of acting physicians that they could log into their Citrix environment, get into their EMR, and start viewing patients. And when they did the research on why that was, it's because those doctors used those same credentials that they used to get into the EMR. They used them for their banking system. Because they had to remember 20 things. So it remains a people challenge more than anything. How do you get, it's Baylor Scott and White now 70,000 some odd employees with Memorial Hermann. How are you going to get 70,000 people to act in a way that's not going to jeopardize your security position or your security posture? And that still remains the biggest problem within security, I believe.
Yeah, and I think part of that, Bill, I think you're spot on with that, is, when you look at, in some cases, I think there's also an understanding, or at least a feeling, that in many cases consumers are a little bit numb to the cybersecurity. Number one, they don't understand it. Or number two, we've probably all been breached, a handful of times or so in the last several years, whether it's a Target breach or the Facebook. I mean, you name it. I've got several different, monitoring services free of charge on me because I've been breached so many times. They offer that out there. And so when that does happen, you need to take advantage of it. But getting back to your core question about the company, I think it is a people problem, but a technology solution. And by the solution standpoint, it is the people that are doing this. And when you go through, we all do the education, we all do the fake phishing, we all did all those things. And when you look at, even when you tell the department or the division, I'm coming at you next month, with a bunch, you see marginal improvement. People are still clicking on those phishing attacks and jumping into, places that they really shouldn't be jumping into. And I think it's for us, it's still the continuous to try to manage, monitor, detect, contain when it does occur. Because you're right, every system has been breached. If you have not been breached, you just don't know it, right? That's I think the underlying fact. You have been breached. So once that does happen, just like your question, that somebody posed to you, what if just assume they're already in your spot? You have to contain it. You have to contain it so it doesn't spread. Then you have to remove it. You have to figure out how they went in and try to plug that hole again, because it's a never-changing world, when it comes to the expertise coming in on these attacks. The other thing I will say is, when you look at today's internet population, globally, it's about 4 billion. And I think they're estimating it to be 6 billion in the next 5 years. So there's going to be a 50% growth of the potential number of victims for cyber attacks. So you talk about the cyber criminals, they're just kind of salivating. Like, my number of potential attacks will go up by 50% of victims over the next 5 years. That's a huge growth. And that still, isn't even the total population yet. So from that standpoint, I think they see it as the pot is keep getting bigger. And that's where I think, as an individual company or an individual industry, there's only so much that we can do. I think to step it up a notch and do things that are across all industry, like we're trying to do here in Charlotte, if you could bump it up in other major cities and have those cities come together, I think you would see over a period of time, possibly everybody, working together on this. Because to me, this is not a competitive component of, any type of business. You don't wish this upon, your worst competitor. Yeah. This is not something that you play with. We all want to play in a very safe environment and have everybody's data be protected, whether it's yourself, your competitor across the street, or somebody across the country. So it's for all of us to come together. And that's going to be, I think, with the leadership, the boards, the CEOs coming together and start to link things in. So when you look at some of the mergers, that's probably, one of the advantages that goes undetected, is at least when you look at the merger we talked about at the beginning, the one thing that we'll say is those are two very large organizations that now we'll be able to share best practices among each other about how to better protect, the assets and the data that they're privileged to keep on behalf of their patients. And so they will end up having, at the end of the game, a much better protection in place than what they currently have in each individual organization.
Yep. Well, I'm going to move us along. This is the part where you're going to end up doing a majority of the talking. I'm going to the soundbite section. I'm going to toss out 5 different questions, short answers, 1 to 3 minute answers. If you go longer, I'm not going to stop you, but generally 1 to 3 minute answers on these things. We're going to focus in on innovation. The first time I met you was at a Dreamforce event. And I think we were the only 2 healthcare CIOs at the event, and we happened to sit at a table talking to some people about how healthcare could benefit from CRM. And I think it was pretty forward thinking back then, and I was kind of surprised to even see any other healthcare CIOs. I think there's more. I think Dreamforce is actually going on this week, or I think it's going on this week. There's probably more healthcare CIOs there now than there were before. So. All right, so 5 questions, 1 to 3 minute answers. Let's start. Question number 1, what industries do you look to for inspiration for innovation within healthcare?
Great question. My answer would be all. I think there's a lot of nuggets to gain from all industries. So when you look at the energy sector, there's things that they do to try to limit the use of energy. And so from that standpoint, we're trying to limit the use of healthcare. Those are both 2 very precious resources. So I think there's things we can learn from them. Retail, obviously, on how to brand, how to get things out there, banking services, all that stuff kind of brings things into a patient's hands or a consumer's hands, putting things, in your pocket. I think all those different industries are all things that we can learn from. We never within healthcare had to, or very rarely had to, focus much on the consumer aspect of delivery. People came to us because their doctors told them to come to us, or people picked those doctors because they were part of the payer plans, then they were in network versus out of network. I don't have an in-network bank. I don't have an in-network, retail shop. I can go to wherever I want. And I think now that we're continued to move, although I believe at a slower pace than expectations, in terms of, consumer directed and high deductible plans, people do have choice to go in and out of network for the best value of their dollar that they're pulling out of their wallet. So from that standpoint, I think there's all those different sectors you got to learn from. And I don't think there's any specific one that would lead all of them. I do believe they all have advantages where they, moved ahead. And that's where I think when you look at like the Charlotte CIO Association, when we started coming together a half a dozen years ago or so, more informally, part of what we realized was 80 to 85% of all the work that we do was the same. There's very few that actually of the things that we performed as a CIO that actually was different in a bank versus a energy sector versus the healthcare sector. And so once we found that we're not that quote unquote special that we always thought we were, it was really great to be able to share things back and forth and to use some of the techniques that they've used and bring that on to in the healthcare industry.
Yeah, so that's great advice. So if you're a healthcare IT person, develop those relationships outside the industry, and you might learn some things, and they might learn some things from you. So it's great to have those relationships. Second question: what core technologies do you think need to be in place for health systems to become really a digital business or a digital platform for business?
I think what you have to do is you really have to empower the patient / consumer. I'm going to use that interchangeable because to me it is interchangeable. The patient actually has made a commitment to come to your organization, but the next week, they are a consumer again making choice. So to me, you got to be able to put the information to make those decisions in their hands. When most of us do, transfer money to our children or somebody else, they need to pay a bill, we pull out our phone and we make the payments that way. You want to purchase something, you're sitting there in your car driving along in the passenger seat, and somebody says, hey, we need X. You pull out your phone, you buy that hat, you buy that piece of thing. When you want healthcare, I don't think it's become a habit yet that you just pull out your phone and you deliver that service. I do think it's going to grow. Now that's where I think you see probably some alignment with banking, where banking had big banks, where we had hospitals, then you had branches, and we had urgent care centers and physician practices, and then we had urgent care centers, and they had kiosk machines. You see a lot of things that are happening that way, and now I think it's mostly in your pocket. So for me, I think the number one thing is to be able to go to the patient where they want you to be at versus to having the patient come to you. And that's going back to 10 years ago when we all got into telemedicine, and every article now that I read recently kind of continues to show the amount of savings that is occurring, not only in terms of that actual cost for that visit, but also the repeat and the recurring afterwards. I read something this past week that talked about if somebody had a virtual visit versus a visit with a primary care physician, there is less likelihood that that patient will show back up again for any kind of healthcare service within the next 3 weeks. But if you do it to primary care, they're going to want a follow-up visit. So from that standpoint, you start seeing the costs going up when you start doing it the old-fashioned legacy way. And the new way, by having it in your pocket, you're kind of one and done. And if he or she needs to reach you, most of us typically have our phone in our pockets at all times anyway. You can access that information real time.
Yeah, there's some interesting skills. Third question. So I'm gonna look at. I'll narrow it down to 3 areas. 3 areas. I'd like to get your thoughts on innovation possibilities for each. So let's start with the clinician experience. So what are some opportunities for innovation in the clinician experience today?
Yeah, I think there's 2 things. I think one is patient-generated data. Let the patient do the work. Let him or her submit, online or submit via, the web, the information that they're gathering. So if you're monitoring somebody's vitals, let them take the vitals at home. Let them step on that Bluetooth scale. Let them do the things that they needed and have that information be imported back into, the EMR for you to be able to look at. So I think putting that workload upon the patient, most of us, if you look at banking again, you wrote checks in the past or you went to the bank to get cash. Well, now all that stuff happens to me. So let me do the work. I do those clerk and those teller activities myself, and I want to do it myself. So let me do that work for you. And I think on the other side, you hear a lot of the interaction with the EMR and the point and clicks, and some people measure satisfaction as a very highly correlated with the amount of clicks that they have to use on their mouse. Well, voice technology has certainly advanced. Use the voice to interact with the system, just like you use it for Alexa today. I saw where you can pay bills, using the voice. You can schedule appointments using the voice. Alexa can read back the results back to you. And if you're in an exam room talking to a patient and you want to see their most recent results, let your voice be the input into the system to allow it to navigate for you so you can bring that information up versus turning your back on the patient, clicking up here, clicking down here, pulling things back up. I think the voice will alleviate some of the frustration that people have, that providers have with interacting with the EMR.
So second area, innovation possibilities around the consumer patient. I have those listed as 2 separate, but since you brought them together as consumer patient experience, this is probably the most talked about area. What's some of your thoughts on innovation possibilities for consumer patients?
Yeah, and this will be innovative for healthcare, but not innovative for other industries. And you're starting to see it to come out recently. Walgreens announced a couple of months ago a marketplace. You really going to have to bring out cost, quality, be open, be transparent. Don't fight that. Don't keep it enclosed. Don't keep it as a protection for you within your healthcare system. If you're not proud of your reviews or you're not proud of your costs, you're not proud of it, then fix it. Fix that problem. But I think as a consumer, and next time I want to make a decision, I want to see all the possibilities, just like when I purchase a product or a service. If I want to go to a hotel, I can pick any hotel in that city. I can see what the cost is for that night. I can see what the quality reviews are, for that hotel. I can read the comments that people made about it. I can look to see if I have any other kind of points or things that I've earned that allow me discounts or other types of benefits before I make that decision. When you look at healthcare, you typically go in blind with most, if not all, that information. And so I think the marketplace is going to be a big piece for consumers. And I think the healthcare system that says, hey, we're very high quality, we have reasonable costs, I'm a great value, I'm going to go out there and be able to compete online, open, transparent with other providers. And when you look at, especially the telehealth type services, those borders around the state, those are going to be very soon disrupted, broken out, and you'll be able to see your providers across, multiple states. And so from that standpoint, if I'm in California, I don't have to buy a product from California. I can buy it anywhere in the United States and have it be delivered. And that's going to I think, going to happen with healthcare. You're going to have that openness, that transparency when we make these decisions, and it's going to be a demand from the system. I mean, from the consumer, they need to be able to make well-informed decisions, and I think that's going to be a driver for us as that marketplace.
All right. Well, let's jump to the fourth question. Is how do you engage the consumer patient when identifying innovation opportunities? So I know that some health systems have patient panels that they bring in, and some will include of patients in their innovation, sort of identifying the opportunities and checking the progress of different, especially mobile technologies and those kind of things. How do you engage the consumer patient in your innovation opportunities?
Yeah, I think those are all great ways of doing it. You know, the one thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to take something that hasn't been tested yet and beyond like a proof of concept and bring that out to the market to be exposed, because that will look, you know, that will not be a good representation. So for me, going through what I call it is kind of like a dimmer switch. You know, you kind of get the idea, you turn it on, you start to get feedback, you keep fine tuning it, keep turning it up, but you can take that dimmer switch and once you're ready to roll, you can flip it all the way on high. So that's not an issue. The issue is how do you get from the current starting point to high, and I think in a methodical yet fast way, because whatever is innovative today for you, tomorrow somebody else is going to match it. You got to be on to the next thing. So once you get something there, you get it rolling, you got to be thinking 3 to 5 years ahead of what I want to be delivering. And then when the healthcare system or the physician market or whatever, you know, whatever area that you're working in is ready to take advantage of it, you've already moved on to something else. It's up to them to change their processes to take advantage of it, to modify the people to be able to take advantage of it, and to bring all that together. So from a technology perspective, you've got to be, you know, several years out in advance. But when you look at your market and you look at your healthcare system, it's going to be up to them to accelerate and bring that down. So when you look at anything with the consumer, you know, you only kind of get one shot. You know, once you kind of mess something up with somebody, they can move on to the next one, the next provider. So from that standpoint, I do think you got to be careful, but boy, you got to be focused and you got to be fast.
Yeah. So the last question, you could eventually be with one of these innovation partners. So the last question is, what do you look for in a vendor partner that is bringing innovation into your health system? Are there certain characteristics you're looking for? You know, what are you looking for from them?
I think to me, probably first and foremost, it's kind of having a shared vision, a shared culture, you know, people that have the same type of relationship that you want to have together. So from that standpoint, you know, bringing people in who are a good, quote unquote, fit within the organization, I think is extremely important. And equally important to me is shared risk. But this isn't all upside for them and, you know, just downside for you if it doesn't work. This is a shared, you know, we're both going to win together or both aren't going to make it together. This is not something that I'm here to be a test bed for you so you can go take it somewhere else. I want to be part of whatever that is. I want to be part of that solution. If we can make it so that it's actually an advantage to our healthcare system, let me help you be part of something else. When you look at things of that nature, you know, sometimes people go back and they look at how they can, you know, kind of almost like, quote unquote, take advantage of those relationships. I don't like to see it that way because it's to your advantage that that partner is successful. So it's not squeezing everything out of them, put all the risk upon their back. They don't make it, too bad, there'll be another one tomorrow. I think this is something, if you do your due diligence, that you're going to be working together when you have these kind of stumbling blocks, that part of your culture and part of what you want to get accomplished is that you are going to be flexible enough to be able to change enough, modify enough to continue to advance, you know, whatever cause that you're looking at. So to me, it has to be a good fit and they have to be a shared risk with you.
Absolutely. Well, Craig, thanks for coming on the show. Is there a good way for people to follow you on social media or other things?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I actually think Craig Richardville is I don't think I'm the only one in the world that actually has that name. So from that standpoint, you know, when you look at craigrichdville.com or any of my social media, whether it's on LinkedIn or whether you're looking at Twitter or anything of that nature, probably LinkedIn and the craigrichdville.com is the best way to take a look at me and to see some of the things that we're doing. And I'm totally open to engaging, open discussion. So if anybody has any questions, comments, thoughts, and just want to kind of brainstorm on some stuff, like in this case, Bill, with you, this has been so enjoyable. And the information that you bring back to all of us is is fantastic. So I certainly want to applaud you for what you've done over this past year, and certainly to be able to double your goal. That's we all got to want to strive to do things of that nature. So congratulations on that. But certainly, if anybody has any questions, thoughts, comments, want to bounce anything off me, send me a LinkedIn note, CraigRichardville.com. Go to that and go ahead and contact me, and be more than happy to get back with you. And that's the one thing that I will say. I've never ignored a message in my life. I have always replied back. Now, the reply might not be the answer you're looking for, but I've always replied back. So please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, and having been a CIO and having reached out to CIOs, that's no small task with the number of people and communications you have to deal with every day. So awesome. You can follow me on Twitter at the Patient CIO, the Health Lyrics website for my writing. Don't forget the show's Twitter, This Week in HIT. Check out the website, thisweekinhealthit.com, and the videos, thisweekinhealthit.com/video will take you over to our YouTube channel. Please come back every Friday for more news, information, and commentary from industry influencers. That's all for now.